Before the first televised impeachment hearings this week, some Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee are shifting from accusing the Trump administration of a quid pro quo with Ukraine's government to calling it a different term.
I have two problems with quid pro quo. Number one, when you're trying to persuade the American people of something that is really pretty simple, which is that the president acted criminally and extorted in the way a mob boss would extort somebody, a vulnerable foreign country, it's probably best not to use Latin words to explain it. But the other thing I object to is that this was where the Republicans went. Extortion doesn't require a you give me this and I'll give you that kind of quid pro quo.
It's important that the president has due process, and evidence is not a conclusion. We have enough evidence from the depositions that we've done to warrant bringing this forward, evidence of an extortion scheme using taxpayer dollars to ask a foreign government to investigate the president's opponent. But it's important that these witnesses raise their right hands and take questions from both Republicans and Democrats. The president is going to get that. It's important that the Republicans be afforded the opportunity to suggest witnesses that we should call and that we determine whether that is relevant.
Let's bring in Kim Wehle and Amber Phillips. Kim is a CBS News legal analyst and law professor, and Amber is a reporter for The Fix at The Washington Post. Welcome to both of you. I'm so glad to have both of you to help us understand the framework here as we move into this public phase of this inquiry. So, Kim, let me start with you. What does the Constitution actually say about what impeachable offenses are?
It says bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors. But that does not mean that a crime is required in order to justify impeachment. And it also means that certain crimes would not justify impeachment. So a low-level crime, jaywalking, if that were a crime, a low-level pilfering from a grocery store, that would not justify impeachment. But something that is not a crime, abuse of the office of the presidency for personal gain, not in the interests of Americans, that would be a political offense that would justify, in the framer's mind, impeachment.
So just to be clear then, Kim, so it sounds to me as though you're saying it is ultimately in the eye of the beholder, of the lawmakers here, to define what exactly constitutes a high crime or misdemeanor.
Yes, in that there's no statute that gives that definition. There's no Supreme Court case that gives that definition. The definition is not in the Constitution, but we do have historical documents around the time that language was drafted, what the intent of it was, and they were worried about a president using the office of the presidency for his personal gain in order to promote his own interests and not in the interests of the American people. So it's not like this is just shooting fish in a barrel. We have no idea what it means. There is quite a bit of history with respect to what it means. And of course, we have 3 presidents and articles of impeachment with respect to each president that does give us some kind of guidance. But in none of those instances were those presidents convicted and removed from office in the Senate. So there's one thing, what could actually be in the articles of impeachment, which is what the House is doing, sort of like an indictment by a grand jury. Then the question is there enough evidence that would justify removal by a 2/3 of the Senate? Those are two different things. And for a criminal jury, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. It's very high. For impeachment, it is, as you suggest, whatever each individual member of the Senate believes is enough. So one senator could say, I need to be convinced 51% that this happened. The next senator could say, I need to be convinced 99%.
So, okay, with that in mind, we heard this discussed in a bite a moment ago. But Kim, first of all, what is the difference between quid pro quo and extortion?
Well, that's a great question. It's a little bit like what's the difference between collusion and conspiracy that we saw with respect to the Mueller investigation. Quid pro quo is not a legal term. Collusion is not a legal term. Bribery and extortion are. They're both crimes in all 50 states as well as under federal law. And it's essentially a tit for tat. That being, extortion is do this for me or else I will punish you in some way. A bribery would be do this for me and I'll give you a goodie. I will pay you something. I will give you some kind of reward. So they're two sides of the same coin, the idea being we don't want elected officials, politicians, judges making decisions based on either threat of some kind of harm to them or based on some kind of, getting some personal gain, then they're sort of abandoning what the interests are of the electorate. That would be bribery of an official. Here we have allegedly a bribery extortion of the Ukrainian president. That is either announce an investigation into my political rival so I can win the 2020 election. Of course, I'm paraphrasing. This is to put it in the frame of bribery extortion. Or I will not give you the $391 million in military aid that the Senate has already promised you and that you need in order to stave off Russian aggression. Or either, announce this investigation into my political rival, and if you do that, I will give you a goodie that is a meeting at the White House. So that arguably would be bribery, whereas the first idea, withholding aid that was already promised to them, would be extortion. I'm going to punish you by not giving you this aid that you need if you don't give me something that I want.
All right. So, Amber, I want to do sort of a status check now with you with respect to where the impeachment inquiry is, because I think most folks have not had a chance to go through all of the pages of testimony that have been made public. But have the witnesses in this impeachment inquiry so far been definitively saying that there was a quote unquote quid pro quo presented to Ukraine?
Yeah, for the most part, they have. The problem with Democrats' case is they don't have a lot of witnesses saying that firsthand. They heard the president say, withhold this until Ukraine does these investigations for me. What we do hear, I think, is from one of the most notable witnesses, and this person will not be testifying publicly anytime soon that we know of, is Gordon Sunland. He was one of Trump's point person on this Ukraine policy, and he revised his testimony after a bunch of witnesses said, I heard Gordon Sunland say this, to say, you know what, I did pull aside a Ukrainian official and I told them, if you guys want your military aid, you're going to have to announce you're going to do these investigations that are politically beneficial for Trump. Later, Sunland said in testimony, I do think it would be illegal if someone like President Trump were to ask the Ukrainians to investigate the Bidens. That's notable because if you read that transcript of the phone call, he mentions the Bidens.
He does. And, I think also something that can be confusing for some folks is this idea of impeachment versus removal, Amber. Impeaching the president is not the same thing as removing a president from office. We know that a majority of House Democrats supported the impeachment inquiry into President Trump, this process that is taking place right now. But, Amber, is it clear how many would support an actual impeachment? That is to say, having articles of impeachment drafted that would then go on to the Senate.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We're just in like the first step of the first half of this, which is impeachment's the first half. No, we do not know for sure that President Trump will be impeached. We can analyze the political situation, and what I would say is House Speaker Nancy Pelosi would not be pushing this forward if she didn't think she had the votes to impeach him. We also know that there's at least 30 Democrats who say, I would impeach Trump today. I don't care what the articles of impeachment are. This is according to a tally we have here at the Washington Post. That would counterbalance the 30 Democrats who might not vote for it because they won election in Trump districts.
Right. So it's going to be fascinating to see what kind of political calculus here unfolds as especially this public phase of the impeachment inquiry goes on here. So, Kim, what does happen next in this process when these committees are finished calling witnesses?
So the House Intelligence Committee is what is in charge of these public hearings this week. Adam Schiff is the chair of that. They're going to be, as you mentioned, calling witnesses. The American public can decide for themselves if these witnesses are credible, if they believe these witnesses. I think it's very important, particularly since the president has said or tweeted today that the transcripts coming from the closed depositions were doctored, et cetera. People need to make that decision for themselves. Then a report will be drafted by the Intelligence Committee and given to the Judiciary Committee, which is ultimately the committee that historically has been in charge of actually drafting what we call articles of impeachment. And that's where I think where the confusion is. When we say impeach, that suggests actually removal. What that really means is just giving a list of alleged wrongdoing. It's basically a piece of paper that has the various alleged some could be crimes, some could be just abuse of office that is impeachable, according to the House members. Then the full House would vote on the Judiciary Committee's draft articles of impeachment, draft, indictment, so to speak, and then that would go to the Senate, and then Mitch McConnell will preside over the Senate process in terms of the procedure. But it's important to remember the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, John Roberts, will actually, according to the Constitution, be the judge in that trial. So he will be the judge, just like if you see Judge Judy on television, he'll be in the black robe sitting there with a gavel. The jurors will be the members of the Senate. They won't be regular people that are called to jury duty. And 2/3 of the Senate has to decide, yes, we believe these witnesses enough to decide to remove this person from office. And as I indicated, that's never happened. Bill Clinton was acquitted. The Senate decided there was not enough evidence to justify removing him from office. And Richard Nixon realized he was going to lose in the Senate trial, and he resigned prior to even articles issued out of the House. The Republicans came to him in the White House and said, listen, my friend, you're done. And the public opinion shifted once there were public hearings of actual witnesses. So that's why what's happening this week is so important, because people can decide not listen to the media, not listen to politicians, not listen to summaries of the transcript, pundits like some of us, and actually decide for themselves if they believe these witnesses, which Amber suggested have consistently said there was a request for an investigation, a criminal investigation by a foreign government against U.S. citizens, which is quite serious as a structural matter, because you have to remember the president has a huge law enforcement apparatus at his fingertips in the United States. So to tap a foreign entity and to basically say you'll be punished if you don't do this for me, that's, as a matter of the structure of our Constitution, authorizing that kind of power for the office is a problem for future generations, not just the people right now that are going to be watching this week.
All right, Kim Wehle and Amber Phillips, thank you both. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.